Hello and welcome. Welcome to the sofa yet again for a new show, a brand new series from Richard and Paul, which is not
Sunday Chat.
It's not Sunday Chat. No, this is Richard and Paul's ReadAlong. Woo! I know, this is to dispel any myths that I don't read.
And I actually do read a lot, so it's to do the opposite of dispelling that myth, to prove that I do.
To reinforce.
Yeah, absolutely.
Reinforce your reading habits. Paul is an avid reader. I used to be, and I talked about this in the newsletter, I think the first newsletter when we mentioned we were going to do a read-along. I, as a child, read a lot. But what I tended to do was reread my favourite books.
Yeah.
I did try new ones, but whenever I got bored, you know, you get to a certain point in a book at the beginning and it's either make or break.
Yeah.
Very often for me it was break, and I'd toss the book away. And then I would find I would derive pleasure from rereading old stories that I knew well, that had a sort of familiarity about them, a comfort about them. Maybe I was in need of some kind of comfort.
Possibly, yeah.
You know, maybe it was a self-comforting thing.
But I think books are, they can be, and I think this is, sometimes I keep books. I mean, I used to keep a lot of books, but now I keep my favourite books, and I look on the shelf sometimes, and I might never read that book again. But it reminds me of a time when I did read the book, and there was something special about that time. And and books, of course, how you read a book can be influenced completely by how you are feeling in the time that you are at that moment. You know.
Yeah, and I think it's also some books weave a sort of spell. You know, they have you under their spell. I mean, for example, I remember, and I was talking with Vivi, that's Vivi Gregory from What Vivi Did Next and Vivi's Kitchen Garden. We were talking about pop-up books.
Yeah.
And Vivi's got a couple of pop-up books which she shared with me and showed to me the last time we visited her. And I had one as a child which was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
I had that as well.
And it had sort of this big octopus in the centre. And, you know, the Nautilus as well. And, you know, that entranced me. And I can remember the feeling of looking at that book again. You know, and again and again. And, you know, there are certain books that have pictures that also have that effect on me. For example, the Ladybird books, and I'll give Vivi as an example as well. She's got a little collection of Ladybird books as well. In fact, she gifted me The Elves and the Shoemaker a couple of years ago. And, or was it last year? I can't remember. And just to look at those pictures took me back. You know, so it's that feeling, and I guess it's a case of trying to recreate that feeling.
It's interesting because my reading was, I suppose, different. Did your parents read to you?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So my parents read to me, bedtime stories, and then those bedtime stories, which Dad used to make up, Mum used to read, and those bedtime stories developed into reading books, and sort of relatively, quite adult books, sort of early on as well, including Dickens.
So not Jackie Collins, The Bitch and the Stud then?
Not that, no. So it was like, it was Great Expectations. I think I read, it took me a long time, but I read sort of from about the age of 8, 9, something like that. And of course there was lots of words I didn't understand, and I had to have a dictionary to look those up, or I'd ask my parents, and sometimes they'd know, sometimes they didn't. And it was always a part of sort of my bedtime. And I think just like with growing and gardening, like I'm doing now, I sort of grew out of it through life being busy. And I really found maybe about 10 years ago, I got right back into reading and enjoyed it. Then there was a little blip, but I sort of got back in last November to reading. And I think virtually every night when we go to bed, I'll read, won't I, for for 10 or 15 minutes. I'll read a chapter of whatever book I'm reading, or 2 or 3, so yeah.
I think we've mentioned before that reading in bed doesn't, unfortunately, work for me, and that's because I have to use a dry eye cream every night, directly in the eye, and as soon as I put that in, I can't see. So, and I generally fall asleep within 5 minutes of getting into bed, generally.
Yeah.
But I started reading again, probably like you, probably 10 or so years ago, when you bought me a Kindle for Christmas. And I started reading again because books are really quite cheap to download on Kindle, or were in those days. And there are a lot of free books as well. So I got things like H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, Bram Stoker's Dracula, a few of the classics to read.
And the reason that those are generally cheaper is because their copyright has come to an end. So I think it's 75 years after the death of the person or something like that, or the publication, they become available without having to pay royalties.
So I got back into reading, and recently I thought, ooh, I'll get my Kindle out. I tried to charge it, nothing. So I looked into it, and apparently the battery has probably died. So that's a shame. However, I do have the Kindle app on my tablet. Mm-hmm. So, I had to download it. I used to have it, but I think I deleted it. So I downloaded the app so I can start reading using Kindle again, because I quite enjoy the reading experience on the tablet, especially if the book has got photographs, because you get the full colour, nice, bright, vibrant photographs on the tablet. So,
I still like a book. I still like a book. I still like, but for all the books that I read, my preference would be to get them. So I get most of my books now from the library. So I get them physically. There's a few that I've listened to as an audiobook, and actually the first book I'm going to be reading, I've listened to as an audiobook. So I sort of know what the story is, but I'd love to see how my relationship with that book might be different by reading the words. So I'm looking forward to reading it along with you. But yeah, I love the physicality of a book, but then again, I also love the ease of being able to just download something and read it there and then.
Well, I think also there are pros and cons with an e-reader, and a tablet. With an e-reader, with the original Kindles, they were e-ink. So the screen was not illuminated, and it kind of looks just like a book. And, with very realistic ink. Whereas with a tablet, of course, it's illuminated, so there is more of a chance of eye strain. I actually have the brightness turned really quite down. You can also choose a colour background. So I choose a sort of parchment colour background on mine, and I find that the most comfortable for my eyes. So what's the reason for the read-along? Well, it's a chance to share some books that we're reading. It's a chance for you to share books you're reading with us. And the format of this is always going to be a pre-recorded show to begin with, to announce the books that we're reading, or book, if it's a single one. I've got a couple of choices with me. Things that I've read before, and new books as well. And then what we're going to do, a month after this show goes out, we're going to do a live show, so you can discuss directly with us what you've been reading, or whether you've read our choices, or whether you've read other books by the same author. That's how it's going to work, and hopefully we can get a sort of rolling read-along club going. A rolling rhythm.
It'll feel like turning a new chapter each time. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Paul.
That was metaphorical.
Clever. That was a clever metaphor.
Yeah.
So, Paul, are you going to kick us off with your choice, your book choice? I notice you don't have any books with you.
No, I don't.
No.
I don't.
Crazy.
I might
You're crazy.
put a screenshot along the screen. But we're going to be reading, I'm going to be reading, if you're reading with me, you're going to be reading as well, Richard Osman's The Thursday Murder Club, which came out, I think, in 2020.
Now this is, can I just before you carry on, this is Richard Osman, the TV presenter, isn't it?
It is, I was just about to explain that.
Oh, thank you, Paul.
So many of you will know Richard Osman from Pointless and other game shows that he now presents. I think he's presented Pointless with Armstrong. What's his name? I can never remember.
I don't know, it doesn't matter.
For quite a long time, for I think about a decade, something like that. And they originally met at Cambridge University, and Richard Osman then went into TV and he went into comedy. And over the last sort of few years, I don't watch game shows. I find their colour, particularly things like Pointless, just so saturated that I don't like game shows like that. So I didn't watch Pointless, but when I saw that he had a book out, I thought, oh, that'd be quite interesting to read. And I didn't read it until, well, I haven't read it yet, but I did listen to it earlier this year as an audiobook. And of course, many of the books that we will be talking about, you can either get physically, you can get from the library, you can download them from the library as well, you know, maybe get them in charity shops, second-hand shops, that type of thing. So I enjoyed listening to it, but I wanted to really get to know the characters, and I think you get to know the characters more through reading something, so that's what we're going to be doing. And since the Thursday Murder Club came out in 2020, he's written 3 other books which are also out, so he's written 1 per year, and all of them have been major million bestsellers. So I think he's gone from being very much sort of behind the screens, behind the scenes in comedy, in programmes, onto doing presenting, which partly he's still doing now. But now I think he's going to be developing an awful lot, developing his books and spending more time on his books, because that seems to be what he wants to do. So it'll be quite interesting, yeah. And maybe we'll learn a bit more about Richard Osman as we go along as well.
So this is a murder mystery novel?
It's a murder mystery novel, and it's in that sort of cosy crime genre. So it's not too edgy and too fast. And it's set in a retirement village in Kent. And he wrote it because his mum was in a retirement village. And therefore he got to know her and her friends and the community in which they lived. And that's how this book sort of came about. And yeah, it's quite cosy. It's quite cosy.
Is this book part of a series?
Yeah, so all the books he's written now, the 4 books he's written, are all part of this series. Of course, the first one came out as the Thursday Murder Club, and now it's known as the Thursday Murder Club series. So the others are called, they've got different titles, obviously, but they're all part of the same series.
And do you think you're going to be continuing with that series after that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
exciting.
Absolutely.
Do you think I'd like it?
I think you would like the film when it comes out. I think it's I think Steven Spielberg's nabbed up the rights or something. So
really? Wow.
I'm not sure you'll be reading it though, but maybe you will.
It's interesting because I think sometimes you've got to take a bit of a chance, and I think sometimes you've got to pick up something that you would never even dream of reading. I mean, I tend to go for factual books, reference books, space, the universe, all of that kind of stuff, time travel, quantum physics. I love all of that stuff. I don't particularly understand most of it, and I tend to skip the pages that got equations on them.
You see, I'd be working those out.
But I
would be trying to.
You're not a space professor.
No, I'm not.
You're not a Brian Cox.
No, definitely not, no.
But I love all the theories around those concepts, and I actually grasp those concepts very easily. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I've always been interested in astronomy since being a child, so I've had all of those things in my head from an early age. But this time round, I'm doing a bit of a typical Richard. I'm going back to an author that I know and love. And the first book that got me interested in this author was a book called The Weird Stone of Brisingamen. This is the second copy of this book that I had from childhood. I mean, this was $3.99, this paperback, when it was new. But I remember my original copy, I think, was something like 75p.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
Something like that. So the author is Alan Garner. And Alan Garner is still alive, and he lives in my home county of Cheshire. Now, this book is set in a place that's very dear to my heart, Alderley Edge, and it is based around the legend of Alderley Edge, which is to do with the wizard. And in fact, I made a video of my own telling of the story, the legend of Alderley, and you can have a look here. So this is about Colin and Susan's adventures. Now, this is not the book I'm reading. I've read this 100 times, and its sequels, The Moon of Gomrath and Boneland. So if you feel inspired to try an Alan Garner novel, I would recommend this is the one that you start with and continue the series. You can download them, but the Alan Garner novel that I've never read is The Owl Service, although we have watched it on television. So I want to read the book to see how I get on with it, because I think it's quite a bizarre story. And I wonder whether the book will give me a little bit more to go on. Now, Alan Garner tends to write fantasy, and it tends to be in a similar vein to C.S. Lewis, a little bit Tolkien-esque as well. I love The Weird Stone and The Moon of Gomrath. Boneland, little bit different. The Owl Service looks intriguing and quite intense. There are also books by his called Redshift and Elidor as well. But we're going to stick with The Owl Service. That's the book I'm going to read, and I'm going to read it on the Kindle edition. I
read The Owl Service when it came out. I've read all Alan Garner. I think you are completely embedded in Alan Garner, aren't you? Because it was very much about the area that you grew up in and you knew so well, and it's interesting how you can feel really at home in a book, but you can also feel at home in a book even if it's not sort of part of where you live and what you know, because it can create this sort of magic in your head, which I know for me Alan Garner did, particularly other books. I think The Owl Service is a bit of a struggle.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I'm going to try it. I'm going to give it a try, see how far I get. Alan Garner writes generally for young people.
Yeah.
But I think the books that I've read, certainly The Weird Stone and The Moon of Gomrath, are compelling adventure stories that can be enjoyed by adults as well.
Totally.
Having watched The Owl Service on television, the original series, you can't have read The Owl Service when it came out, because it came out in the late 60s.
No, well, I mean, when I was reading Alan Garner, yeah.
The Owl Service is actually set in Wales, and Alan Garner was involved in the filming of it. And they filmed it, believe it or not, just up the road from where we stay in North Wales.
Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah. So, talking about having an affinity with the area that a book's set in, that is a little bit strange, because I have an affinity with Alderley Edge, always have done since I was a child, and been fascinated by the story of the wizard. And the energy of Alderley Edge is different to anything else I've ever known. And I guess there are feelings like that around the area that we stay in North Wales. So that's all very interesting and sort of all neatly links together. So I'm really looking forward to reading it. So if you perhaps decide to read an Alan Garner novel, please do, and we can discuss it together in the live show in a month's time.
And obviously, if you want to read Richard Osman's The Thursday Murder Club, please do, and we'll discuss that as well.
And of course, it's not just about the books we're reading. If you want to join the live show next month and talk about a book that you're reading that you'd like to recommend to us, then great,
Yeah.
feel free. But during the live show, we'll be talking about the books themselves, maybe even reading an extract from the books, and talking about how we felt about the story, and giving you the chance to chip in as well. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to reading the book, so yeah, and I think I'll read The Owl Service as well.
Oh, greedy.
Yeah, I think I will. In the month I'll have time to do that, and also finish the book that I'm reading at the moment as well.
I started another Alan Garner. I read Redshift, but I started Elidor as a child and couldn't get on with it. So, like I said earlier, sometimes you get to a point and decide whether you're going to continue. Sometimes you've got to push through that point. Sometimes books sort of reveal themselves slowly.
Yeah.
And I think we have to get away from this sort of feeling of instant gratification.
Absolutely. I think sometimes you can be reading a book and you're feeling actually it's not the book for you. And there is a book which I'm going to be reading later on in this series, which was a bit like that. I got it free from our local library. There's a sharing shelves there, and I took it there, and it's halfway through a series. And I grabbed it and thought, oh yeah, I'll have a read of that. It took me most probably about 20 or 25 pages to get into it, and I thought, I'm not getting into this. And then suddenly I clicked with it, and I enjoyed it. And I think that does happen. Sometimes if you're not quite enjoying something, just push through it a little bit more, and maybe it'll open up. Yeah.
So that's it for episode 1 of the Read Along. The authors are Alan Garner and Richard Osman. I will be reading Alan Garner's The Owl Service, and Paul will be reading The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. So thanks very much for watching. We do hope that you join in with us so we can have a right old good discussion about the books. And that's it for today. So thanks very much for watching, and thank you for subscribing and following us on social media. So it's bye from me.
And it's bye from me.
Take care, toodle pip.
Bye.